Okay, all right. Well, then let's. Oh wait, I forgot. I need to go back. We didn't finish. So our last class, where we were talking about social and economic life in the Roman Empire, and we were talking about slavery. All right, and so we'd just gone through kind of different types of positions or labor performed by enslaved persons, right? And again, a huge spectrum of jobs and tasks are going to be performed by enslaved persons, right? So we're on treatment, right? So the kind of key defining characteristic of the kind of enslaved experience in ancient Rome is that enslaved persons had no control over their own bodily integrity. And more so than anything else, this lack of control over one's body symbolized enslaved status, right? So this meant that enslaved persons, regardless of what task or job or lifestyle they may have been occupying, right, could be subject to whipping and assault, sexual abuse. Enslaved persons could be called as witnesses for court cases, but their testimony was inadmissible unless they had been tortured first. So even if they were a voluntary witness who was willing to comply, the testimony wasn't allowed unless they had been tortured first. The assumption being was, well, only torture would ensure that it was true, right? So once again, kind of speaking to the lack of control over an enslaved person's body. There were extremely limited protections granted to enslaved individuals by Roman law. Okay. One protection, if one's owner was quote unquote overly cruel. Now, everyone can already see the first problem here, right? What does it mean to be overly cruel, especially if all of this is considered normal? So if one's owner was considered overly cruel, an enslaved person could basically seek out a magistrate and apply for asylum. Right? You see the second problem of this. If your master is overly cruel, you have to at least at some point, right, be able to find a magistrate and seek asylum, at which point they will precipitate the sale of the enslaved person to a new owner. Okay, not much of a protection. The other one is slaveholders were theoretically not allowed to kill an enslaved person unless they had, quote unquote, a good reason. Again, very little protection comes from this.
Did they have like an ancient Fugitive Slave Act at this time?
I mean, they didn't need a full act per se because there was no. All right, so what makes the Fugitive Slave Act necessary is that there are people that disagree with the institution of slavery and are opposed to it in areas where it's not being practiced. So that doesn't exist in Rome. So there's no need for a particular act like that, right? So if an enslaved person, did, we would say self-emancipate or try to escape or something like that, there were efforts to recover the person, right? That was under Roman law their property. But there weren't necessarily special. There wasn't the need for kind of special laws or anything like that. But certainly there was lots of concern among Roman slaveholders about enslaved persons escaping. Right.
Were these laws put in place before or after Spartacus's revolt?
Before.
Before.
Mm-hmm.
And how may I ask how much did the laws change after?
Very little.
Really?
The one thing I think that changed was, well, maybe we should not have as many enslaved persons with weapons together in one spot. But there was very little, I would say, collective self-reflection on the practice of slavery as an institution that comes out of it. It's kind of accepted as, I would say, kind of just standard operating procedure. This is the way the world works. Okay. On the flip side, there was an attempt to incentivize good service. Which brings us to kind of the act of manumission. So manumission is basically setting free an individual enslaved person. So this would be done expressly at the discretion of the owner, the slaveholder. They had the right to basically set free an enslaved person, again, for any reason they wanted, usually tied to the idea of good service. This is important for a number of reasons, one of which is that if you were enslaved and manumitted by a Roman citizen, you then received Roman citizenship yourself. Okay? So it was, especially early on in Rome's history, one of the few ways that citizenship was kind of readily extended to non-Romans, non-Latins. Okay. Let's see. So manumission, right, freeing an individual. Someone who had been formerly enslaved would be called a freed man or a freed woman. Okay. Become citizenship, and then it was expected that you would maintain a relationship with your former master, with your former owner. And again, this relationship was spelled out in law about what the requirements of both parties were. So it was kind of supposed to be, after manumission, an ongoing relationship, and it fell under this kind of larger umbrella of patronage, right? The relationship between two individuals of unequal status. Okay, so reasons for manumission, as I said, kind of incentivizing good service. It would also be things like affection, sometimes might develop. Manumitting someone for the sake of marriage, purchasing and manumitting a family member, everything in between. Is there a question, or is there a question?
No.
Okay.
I can have a question.
Oh, right.
Right. So my question is it possible for former female slaves to become Roman citizens if they had a relationship with their former master?
If they had been, all right, so if they had been manumitted, then yes, they would become citizens. So again, being in a relationship, which again was the consent of the enslaved woman was immaterial, but being in a relationship didn't guarantee citizenship or any type of treatment. But it was seen under Roman law as kind of a valid reason for manumitting an enslaved person. And there were in fact all sorts of special considerations given to slaveholders who wanted to manumit an enslaved person for marriage, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean,
there were all sorts of basically special abilities and special rights given in those situations. So this brings us to a really interesting monument, right? So this is a funerary monument, and we've got a picture up here, we've got text inscribed below. So the text reads, Claudia Propontis erected this monument for Tiberius Claudius Dionysius, her well-deserving patron, right? So again, Claudia Propontis would have been a freed woman, right? And that she created this funerary monument, right? Basically after the death, right? Honoring her patron, right? So the individual who had once owned her and then had manumitted her, Claudius Dionysius. Okay, everyone see that? Okay, so what's really interesting about this is the picture. Can anyone see the picture? Or see what's going on in the picture?
They're shaking hands.
They're shaking hands. And this would have worked better if I was able to introduce this before I ran out of time on Monday. Does anyone remember anything about shaking hands from Monday? I know we're now at a gap and it makes things less useful. No, not there. What was it about shaking hands?
That's marriage ceremonies.
Right, so like this was kind of like the sign of marriage, right? So one of the things that is kind of fascinating about this tombstone, right, is that if you just look at the picture here and you see this communicates married couple, right? The text here mentions nothing about marriage. right? We have lots of other tombstones where we have someone like refer to an individual as like their well-deserving husband and patron, or something like that, where it's clear that, again, the person had manumitted her, they got married, something like that. This one's interesting, right? Because by all accounts, the picture communicates that they were married, right? But here in the text below, husband doesn't get used. That she just describes her partner, right, the deceased, or whatever, just in terms of their post-manumission relationship. So it's really interesting because it tells us something about, I'm not sure what it tells us, right, but it tells us something about kind of the, not only the way that manumission worked, but kind of how kind of freed men and freed women kind of saw themselves in their place within the Roman community, oftentimes through connection with their patron. Okay, Kieran.
Would that guy's surname actually be Dionysus, or like, would that be made up?
Okay, so probably, right? We can't say this universally, right? But oftentimes, someone with a Greek name, it was very common that they had once been enslaved themselves. And so, Greek names in general, and then lots of times they liked using like the names of God. Dionysus itself was kind of still kind of a name that was used commonly, but also oftentimes naming enslaved persons after kind of gods or fantastic figures. And then when you were freed, basically you took on the family name and first name of the person that manumitted. So probably, although we can't say this for sure, that Dionysius had been enslaved himself and then had been set free. The person who had manumitted him had been Tiberius Claudius something. And so once he is freed and becomes a Roman citizen, right, he becomes Tiberius Claudius Dionysius. And so much like the woman here was probably Propontis, was her name while enslaved. And then when she was set free, she takes on the feminine version of the family name. Right.
So it's kind of like how modern Italian Catholics will name their children after a saint or something to that effect, almost like it was sort of,
Oh, the Dionysius part?
yeah.
No, probably. Well, actually, I mean, we don't really know. We don't know how, whether the name Dionysius is just associated with enslaved persons or whether it's associated with people in general. So it's hard to say because we don't have a lot of evidence that talks to the reasons why people do things. Okay. All right. Other questions here? Kieran.
Was there any like Greekophile Romans who were like obsessed with Hellenic culture?
Oh yeah, lots, many. So.
It's like, would they visit Greece themselves?
Oh yeah, Greece was the thing is that there was a recognition of, I don't want to use the word superiority, right? There was a recognition of kind of Greece's cultural past, and that it was in many ways more impressive than Rome's, and the Romans kind of want to glom onto that themselves and kind of adopt it for themselves, and that's going to encourage a lot of what's called Philhellenism, right? Kind of Greek loving, and like visits to Greece, visits to kind of the old sites, taking the grand tour of all the kind of famous sites associated with Peloponnesian War, that kind of stuff.
So did the Romans know about like the Minoans and the Mycenaeans?
Not a lot, not in terms of archaeological evidence, right? So they would have like the stories that we read, like at the beginning of like Thucydides or Herodotus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like about the Persians stealing women or something like that.
Right.
So they knew stories of like the Trojan War and the myths and things like that, but hadn't like necessarily really gotten a good exposure to kind of the archaeological remnants. Okay, all right. Any other questions? Question? No? Okay, so let's move on to acculturation and resistance. All right, Roman Empire, 2nd century CE, again, stretching over a vast geographical distance. North Africa, Spain, Great Britain, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Armenia, right? Up in the Balkans. So a wide geographical district. As we mentioned in the last class, right? Rome, multicultural, multi-ethnic empire, right? Despite policy of toleration, right? Roman culture was still viewed as, again, superior, right? It was kind of a culture of primacy. That if you wanted to be taken seriously, if you wanted to be respected, if you wanted to advance, right? You needed to participate in the kind of imperial Roman culture. So this brings us to a term, right, that modern historians often use, Romanization, the act of becoming Roman-like, okay? Adopting language, dress, social norms, etc., right? Roman culture itself, well, I just kind of said this, right, very much going to be influenced and built upon Hellenistic and Greek culture, right? Especially the eastern part of the Roman Empire, right, which had been it was the Hellenistic world, right? Versus the West, which is going to have kind of a more tangential kind of connection to it, right? But the Greek culture, like speaking Greek, Greek art, writing Greek, is still going to really be prominent here in the eastern part, right? The army will play a big role in Romanization, right? For two reasons. One, the army is going to be stationed in various provinces, right? And so people are going to get kind of firsthand encounter of Roman culture, and the army itself becomes a vehicle for people to kind of, essentially get a job or advance through Roman society or to earn Roman citizenship itself. So many subject peoples will end up joining the Roman army and through their experience in the army, again, become Romanized. This being said, much like we talked about with the Hellenistic world, this is not a one-way street. It's not that there's this static Roman culture that is being passed along to people kind of passively, right? There's a cultural exchange and blending that's going on as Rome expands. And in fact, right, Romanization, rather than simply becoming Roman-like, it becomes kind of part of the group that gets to decide what is Roman, or what is it like to be Roman, right? Because again, we're talking about centuries of history. What it means to be Roman is going to change and evolve. What it looks like to be Roman in 400 CE is not going to be the same as 400 BCE, right? So again, with this cultural exchange, more people are kind of coming into the mix. They're becoming Roman and getting to decide collectively, what does Roman look like? This being said, becoming Roman didn't mean losing all aspects of one's original identity. Okay, so an important part of this acculturation, again, is also going to be the spread of Roman citizenship, which is not exactly the same thing as the spread of Roman culture, right? Citizenship talks about a particular relationship with the state. We talked about the social war, right, where the Italian allies demand full Roman citizenship because they're just doing the bad stuff. They don't get any of the good stuff, right? Massive war. Eventually, at the end, right, Rome's going to win, but citizenship will be given kind of throughout Italy. In the provinces, it's going to be a little bit more of a, a little bit more of a irregular flow, right? So the ways that citizenship gets passed down, municipal elites, right? So those of the local aristocracy who are kind of running things at a city level are given Roman citizenship. Army veterans are given Roman citizenship. Right? Sometimes discretionary grants could become given to individuals, right? So the Roman government might say, okay, you're a citizen now, right? Less common at first, becomes more common down the road. A big one we already mentioned, right? Manumission of enslaved persons. It's going to be an important way that Roman citizenship is going to spread, again, throughout the provinces. And then in some cases, grants to entire communities, where they say, okay, everyone in this city, you're now a Roman citizen.
Would Rome allow like some of the conquered peoples and cultures to continue like pagan traditions?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I think maybe I skipped over. Toleration, right? Or no, wait, where did they put the? I guess Maybe I took that out. Anyway, yes, so as a general rule, right, Rome had a general policy of toleration. Roman government really didn't care what you did, so long, we talked about it in an earlier class, so long as you paid your taxes and didn't rock the boat. Okay? Now, again, all cultures aren't equal, so that if you're not participating in the Roman culture, if you're not speaking Latin, if you're not educated in a certain way, you're going to be looked down upon, you're going to be denied opportunities, per se, to advance. But there's no, generally speaking, kind of compulsion to make people conform. What the Roman authorities want, taxes and stability. Okay? So that means you're going to get a wide variety of religious practices, a wide variety of dress, a wide variety of, customs that still continue to exist within the Roman Empire. All right, so let's turn to our first primary source. Tacitus, number 36, famous Roman historian. So this primary source is talking about a debate that is taking place in the Roman Senate, right? In attendance, we have the Emperor Claudius. So, what is this debate about in 36? What's the debate about, Anthony?
Should they let these Germanic tribesmen into the Senate?
Right. Okay. So, also not quite Germanic, Gallic at the time still. Big difference for the Romans at this point, right? So here, Gallia Comata, quote unquote, long-haired Gaul, has been Roman, part of the Roman Empire for about 100 years, right? The elite citizens, right? The local aristocracy, right? Who are handling kind of municipal matters, they and their families have been given Roman citizenship, right? Now, the one thing that these Roman citizens don't have is the right to hold kind of high political office in Rome and to be a member of the Senate. So the debate is should these Roman citizens from Gaul, right, be allowed to hold office and serve in the Senate? Okay. So what is the argument given for no, they should not be allowed to do so? What's the argument? Anthony.
Some of the previous haunting memories, such as like the Battle of Alesia, I think they the what do you call it? The Gauls like got reinforced by like another group of Gauls. It was like really large, so there's a lot of bloodshed there. So
There was, yeah. So they call to mind the fact that we, the Romans, were just fighting against these people 100 years ago. I would say less direct haunting memories, in the sense that this happened a while back, right? But there's an effort to perhaps use these memories to communicate a point. Right.
So, again, the reason why these Gallic magistrates and officials couldn't excel was because they were ethnically Celtic and not Roman.
They were not fully Roman.
But they spoke Latin, or
They did?
Was Gallic allowed to still be spoken, or was it like wiped out?
No, people are still speaking. It's hard to say, right? Because we don't have great documentation, but probably there's still going to be common languages that are spoken, right? Now, again, these individuals, right, are heavily Romanized in the sense that they are Roman citizens. They are, in many ways, indistinguishable from Roman citizens born in Italy at this point. You could put them in a room and probably not tell the difference. Because again, there's this, they're like third generation Romans, so to speak, right? But so in reality, not going to be a huge difference. But the argument that the opponents are making, not fully Roman, right? What makes them not fully Roman?
That they have, in these words, barbarian bloodlines.
Right. Again, that it's the origins, right? Going back to the battles that these were enemies that we were fighting and conquering 100 years ago, that they are somehow lesser, right? Not fully Roman. Now, why do you think they're making this argument? Right.
I think it could relate to the sentiment that a lot of ultra right-wing conservatives have today, that they feel that they're going to be replaced in the homeland that their ancestors built.
Okay,
And there's a fear of change, and especially in a rapid change.
okay.
It's interesting to see how so many of these same themes, like there's nothing new under the sun, really.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fair enough.
Wasn't one like a reason why the the Western Empire fell was because they were doing exactly this?
No, or you mean that there were?
I think it was in the 300s or the 400s, like these Germanic tribes, you know.
Okay, so that. Oh, you mean like that they were allowing in other people and making them Romans?
Yeah.
So that is a really old, essentially eugenics-based argument that was really popular about 100 years ago, but has been really thoroughly discredited. So historians for a while argued that, but now no one really believes it to be true.
So were the Romans prejudiced against the Gauls because they were such fierce, like, warriors, and they were so resistant to Roman rule, I guess?
And what do you think from the source?
I suppose, yeah. I think that'd definitely play a part in that. Sure.
I mean, I can't tell. Like, we can't tell what people were thinking, right? We don't have a lot of kind of specific details about individual feelings or responses. So I'm sure there were some people that were just, I hate these people, you know, for whatever reason. But there's something else there, right? So Brian brought up the idea of, you know, replacement, which might be there, right? And there's something kind of maybe more tangible here, right? Because really, what's the argument about? They're Roman citizens. No one's debating that, right? What's the debate really about?
Their patriotism?
Oh, well, I mean, in a way, yeah, right? I mean, it certainly gets used by both sides. Liam, what's the debate about? What are they debating?
I guess giving them political representation.
Not political representation per se. They have political representation. They're Romans. They're Roman citizens.
I mean, yes, of course, they are Roman citizens, but just going back to passage 23, yeah, again, and if you look at the bottom, there's also the fear of these people of rising up again, and in a way.
I mean, I want to say, like, despite that that's what kind of the text says, that's not a real fear. Like, no one really fears that the Gauls are going to rise up again and, like, kind of, you know, attack Rome. Like, that part's kind of gone, right? So, like, rhetorically, yeah. Like, rhetorically, they're throwing everything against the wall that they can to basically cast these, again, Roman citizens as being foreigners, right? But what's really at stake here? What's the debate about?
Them holding political power, like having political, like seats in office and stuff like that.
Okay, so them, again, not just political power, holding political office, being able to staff magistracies, right? To be elected or to be selected into office. At this point, we're not really elected. Being selected into office or having a seat in the Senate. Why is that perhaps a contentious issue?
Maybe because the Senate is losing. Well, they've already lost like most of their power, I think. But
I mean, true. They had been losing some power.
so maybe they feel threatened that if they start letting in other people like the Gauls, that things could be getting worse for them.
Mm-hmm. Could be. I mean, could be. I can't say no, but I think there's something else. Right?
Fear of foreign influence, so if more foreigners rise in power, they might express favoritism in policy towards their own native born people as opposed to the people who originated the system to begin with.
I mean, again, possible, right?
It could also be because, as you just said, that as a result of this increase in foreign influence, that they might lose their traditions and customs along the way.
I mean, again, I don't want to say no, because they're going to, you know, these people seem to be throwing everything against the wall. But I'm thinking realistically, what's motivating them? Like, like this area is heavily Romanized, right? Like there's no real concern that like somehow, again, Gaul is going to rise up and defeat Rome, right? There's no real concern, I would say, that Roman culture per se is under threat, despite the language that's being used, right? So you're absolutely right. They are using that language, very much so. But getting at what's really at stake, right? A couple of sentences from this first paragraph. Italy, it was asserted, is not so feeble as to be unable to furnish its own capital with a senate. Once our native-born citizens sufficed for peoples of our own kin. He goes on a little bit later, he says, what distinctions will be left for the remnants of our noble houses, or for any impoverished senators from Latium? Every place will be crowded with these millionaires. And he goes on, whose ancestors basically fought against us. What is, at least, so I can't discount any of just the general kind of emotional ethnic, not quite racism, but that kind of ethnic chauvinism of these people are like, certainly there too, right? But what's also a very real tangible concern that's motivating this?
That the senators who come from, I guess in their mind, like, I guess for like old money, type power,
Right.
will lose that type of power.
Why would they lose that type of power?
Because they bring in new people, they're going to be the newer.
There you go, right? You're bringing in new people, you've already got more competition, right? And if these people are, kind of rich and up and comers and stuff, right? Like, I'm gonna lose my, my opportunity. Like, they're gonna take away my spot, right? Because again, there's limited offices, there's limited seats in the Senate. Bringing in new people means old people, are going to lose something, right? And so part of it is a tangible trying to kind of hold on to what limited power that's left, right? And mobilizing this idea of kind of cultural superiority to defend it or to support it, right? Like I said, but we also don't know exactly what people believe. That part is kind of absent to us. So we get Claudius's response, right? And so Claudius is having none of this, right? He does not accept the argument and in fact refutes it, right? Remember, the argument is, well, they're not Roman enough, so to speak. What's Claudius's argument? Or what's his rebuttal? What's his rebuttal?
Some of the biggest Roman noble families come from foreign areas.
Mm-hmm. So basically, some of that, in fact, might say most Romans, right, came from kind of non-Roman, areas or families, including the emperor himself. What else does he say?
He mentioned Sparta and Athens.
Yeah.
How they didn't rely on others and then they fell.
It's not so much relying on. I mean, you're right. He's not relying on others.
Yeah, not relying, but what was the ruined Sparta and Athens with this? That mighty as they were in war, they spurned from them as aliens, as those whom they had conquered. So it's saying like. But they didn't turn them away, but they saw them as they saw the people that worked for them as lesser.
Right. And what happened to Athens and Sparta?
They imploded basically.
Okay, so again, what's Claudius saying then? Because he then goes on to kind of compare Rome to this.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Then he's saying, when you conquer people and then you don't give them a chance to speak, they're going to eventually rise against you and cripple your economy.
Okay. Versus what has Rome done in the past?
It has included people in their votes.
There you go, right? Yeah. So he's like going back to the very beginning. Rome's policy has been, and again, this is a bit of a rosy, kind of view of it, right? But it has been one of inclusion, right? Of bringing people into the Roman identity into the Roman culture, into the Roman citizenship. In fact, he says that's where Rome's strength comes from.
Rome gradually evolves, so there are going to be changes like somewhere down the line, such as like one change that actually happened was that now the plebeians could be magistrates.
Does Claudius happen to say something about that? All right, yes, he does. All right, so it's a great segue. So on page 3, very bottom of paragraph 25, Claudius says, everything, senators, which we now hold to be of the highest antiquity, was once new. Right? Because again, people were saying, well, this is the way that we've always done it. This is tradition. He's like, everything that we consider to be kind of age-old practice, there was a point where it was new. He says, plebeian magistrates came after patrician, Latin magistrates after plebeian, magistrates of other Italian peoples after Latin. So what's he saying here with this list of things, which Anthony was gesturing to?
The magistrates evolve.
What about them evolved?
Their culture, their identity, their patriotism, really.
You're close. You're close. It's not so much I think that the magistrates evolved, but what's he talking about here when he talks about like plebeian came after patrician, Latin came after plebeian. And I think
All of Rome evolving,
and how did Rome evolve?
by changing languages.
Not quite what he means here. It's not that they changed language. What did they change?
They changed the people that could become magistrates.
You got it, right? The people who were eligible to become magistrates, who was allowed to serve. Claudius says, look, right now everyone's talking about, Italy, Italy, Italy. This is the way that it's always been done. And he's like, look, there was a time when it was just patricians. And then it got expanded so plebeians could also be magistrates. And then it got expanded to people who were from Latium, Latin, could also be magistrates. And then it got expanded to everyone who was Italian, from Italy, could be a magistrate. So he's like, you're talking about Italy, and this is the way that it's always been done, but there was a point when letting Italians in was new. There was a point when letting Latins in was new. There was a point when letting plebeians in was new. He's like, everything that we talk about now as being age-old, at one point it was new, right? Including who gets to be a magistrate. And then he goes on and says, this practice too will establish itself. And what we are this day justifying by precedents will itself be a precedent. In other words, this thing that we're arguing about today, saying, well, this is the way that it's always been done, in the future, someone's going to look back at what we're doing today and say, oh, that's the way it was always been done. In other words, right, things are constantly changing. It might not feel like it, right, but, what is kind of traditional, what is Roman, what we're supposed to be doing, not static, right? It has changed over time. And the emperor's kind of speech carries the day, right? The measure passed. The Gallic Romans are now eligible to hold these offices. Okay, questions here? All right, so again, general policy of toleration. General, kind of, again, ideas for inclusion and opportunity and becoming Roman. But, again, what happens when there's tension? What happens when this doesn't work out? All right, so we have a notable, one of the most famous counterexamples. Judea. Right, Judea. And that, again, by I guess I would say the good fortune of religious traditions, that we have a wider kind of variety of source material about kind of the conflict between local culture and Roman culture, right? Because of the preservation of both Jewish and Christian texts. So we can get a fuller picture of kind of this tension between cultures that can maybe give us some broader insight to what might be happening elsewhere in the empire. Okay, so we start with the region of Judea, down here where the red arrow is pointing to, right? And we have the Israelites, who are going to be centered in the kingdom of Judea. So the Israelites around the year 1000 BCE will establish the kingdom of Israel. Israel will then split into two kingdoms, Israel in the north, Judah in the south. And that these two kingdoms will, go down here, right, essentially be absorbed. There'll be periods of independence or being absorbed into larger, more powerful states, such as the Persian Empire and the Seleucid Kingdom. Now again, unlike other cultures here, right, the Israelites are going to develop a monotheistic religious belief, right, a belief in there being only one supreme God, right, and this becomes a core part of the Israelite / Jewish identity that's going to emerge, right, something that defines who we are and how we are different from other people, right, the worship of the single all-powerful God. Okay, now, with this kind of distinct identity, a major issue that is people are going to be wrestling with for centuries, right, is what does it mean to be Jewish and have this Jewish identity, while also being a member or an inhabitant of a foreign or non-Jewish state, right? What does it mean to be Jewish living under the Persian Empire? What does it mean to be Jewish living as part in the Seleucid Kingdom? What does it mean to be Jewish living in the Roman Empire? Okay, can anyone remember when we encountered this before? We talked about this. Right.
Very similar to the original Babylonian exile, and how Jewish identity was radically shifted to being a displaced people who maintain their own, in many ways maintained their own traditions, more orthodox in exile as opposed to when they were brought back, and the southern kingdom, the other part of the kingdom began worshiping other gods, worshiping idols. Very interesting how exile kept them true to their faith.
Yeah, so absolutely very true. Very true. There was something we talked about specifically in class, though. Had to do with the Hellenistic era. Anyone remember? There was the story of the evil high priest, Jason. No? All right, so we read a selection from the book of Maccabees, right? That is one of these texts in the Hellenistic era. And they speak of the evil Jewish high prince Jason, who is enthralled with the Greek culture. And what does he want to do to the Israelites, to the Jewish people? He wants to make them Greek. And he builds gymnasium. He has them enrolled as citizens in the city of Antioch, right? Again, this kind of Greek identity. They participate in, Greek games and other types of activities. And why does the author of this, right, the book of Maccabees, second book of Maccabees, right, why does the author find this problematic? Why is it problematic? Right.
It's problematic because the Orthodox Jews rejected any kind of assimilation to Goyish society, and they saw it as a corrupting influence.
And so not just corrupting, right, but the author, right? The author of the second book of Maccabees, right, because they're focusing so much on the Greek things, what are they doing? So again, it kind of fits into this idea of corrupting, right? They're not fulfilling their religious duties, they're turning away from Jewish law, right? They are rejecting what they once prized in favor of these new honors. And worst of all, right, kind of the cherry on the top, right, is that a group of these new kind of Hellenized Jews travel to the city of Tyre to participate in these big events, these big games, and they're going to sacrifice to Hercules, right? And again, violating this core tenet of the Jewish identity and Jewish law. But
Isn't that why a lot of people hated the Sadducees because they were affiliated with Rome?
We'll come back to that. Yes, but short answer, yes. Anyone remember what happens when the Hellenized Jews go to Tyre and they're supposed to sacrifice to Hercules? They decide, wait, no, this is inappropriate. I don't want to do this, right? And instead, they take the money and they dedicate it to building a navy, right? Another way of building ships, right? Another way of kind of demonstrating their Hellenic identity and connection, right? And again, it's a story that's very much wrestling with, well, what does it mean to be Jewish and part of the Hellenistic world, right? The author is like, impossible, right? Being part of the Hellenistic world, is completely at odds, right? Versus we see other people, such as the athletes who are going to sacrifice, who perhaps see, right, a way of doing both, right? Well, it's okay to participate in the games. I can still be Jewish. I can't sacrifice to the god, though, right? That's too much, right? And so, in fact, this is kind of one example of an ongoing, like centuries-long debate about, again, what does it mean to be Jewish, living in a non-Jewish state? And there's going to be different answers that come to it, right? Going back to Anthony's point about the Sadducees and stuff, right? There's going to be different groups of people who have different visions for what should this be. Back to that in a second, right? 167, we get the revolt of the Maccabees, where the Jewish people are going to break free of the Seleucid kingdom and establish their own independent state. This is the Hasmonean kingdom of Judea, right? It will be independent for about 100 years. There's going to be a civil war in Judea in 63. Rome is going to get involved, making it a tributary kingdom, so that the kingdom is still technically independent, but is now kind of under Rome's authority. In the year 6 CE, Judea is going to be annexed and formally brought into the Roman Empire, right? Becoming a province, right? The province of Judea, ruled by a Roman governor. All right, so this brings us to our next source, the Edict of Augustus on Jewish Rights, issued shortly before the annexation of Judea, right? So when Judea was still technically independent, but under Roman authority. And what does Augustus have to say in this edict? What does Gabriella, what does Augustus have to say?
Basically started taking a liking to the nation of the Jews and basically just protecting their rights.
Mm-hmm. And what rights specifically?
Talks about how nobody should steal their sacred books.
Mhm.
If anybody were to steal them or anything like that, they'd be punished.
Right, okay. Good. Brian?
Sorry, just to back up. Yeah, sorry, just to back up. That anyone dedicated to their artifacts and bodies, or bring away the synagogues or promise, they shall be punished. But this is also mentioned in how Jews will be allowed to continue to following the customs in accordance with the ancestral law.
Mm-hmm. Very good. So what do you think that refers to? What do you think it refers to? Nikolai?
I had to guess.
Mhm.
I'm going to say that it refers to when Alexander the Great conquered and he left everybody to their own court as long as they learned the Greek language.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, the ancestral law that Augustus is talking about kind of goes back even further. So it's a similar idea, right, of letting them kind of retain this degree of autonomy, so to speak, despite being under Rome. But what's the ancestral law that he's referring to?
I was thinking about I was thinking about the Torah For a second. It has been the source for ancestral law.
Absolutely,
For the
right?
Jews.
Yeah, so again, Mosaic law, right? So again, the kind of the religious, but also kind of the cultural and kind of daily law of the Jewish people. He's like, and they should be allowed to continue living by this law, right? And their whole, kind of their sacrifices, their offerings, their holy books, all of this is to be protected, right? So again, it's an edict that again theoretically is kind of promising toleration, right? That the Jewish people should be able to kind of again follow their customs, live their life without being interfered with. Okay. Now, why do you think Augustus needs to issue an edict?
Because people were doing stuff to the.
Okay, right. So again, it's kind of to the right that he's on the one hand is promoting this idea of, okay, toleration, this is important, but what is probably making this necessary, we can't say for sure, but we get an idea of the context, right, is that there is kind of conflict going on over kind of basically people's lives in Judea. All right.
Quick question.
Yes.
When the Romans but when the tension between the Romans and the Jews and escalated even further in the years afterward, especially with Rome renaming Judea.
Absolutely. That's where we're at here, right? So, situation Judea, right? Again, we can't talk about it because again, the sources make this clear, right? So this is like one of the few kind of areas, really the only area, where we get a more nuanced look at kind of the social dynamics, right? And that this was, again, a very kind of divided, we might even say kind of factionalized area among the inhabitants of Judea, right? Where there were all sorts of visions and beliefs about what should our relationship with Rome be? How can I be Jewish with this under Roman authority? Can I work with the Romans? Can I not work with the Romans? Right? And again, there's going to be a variety of groups, a variety of answers. So on the one hand, you're going to have people that are very much see themselves as Roman and connected with the Roman state and participating as Roman citizens in kind of the local governance and administration. On the other side of the spectrum, you have people who are engaging in outright acts of rebellion and civic uprising, right?
Zealots.
Zealots. And the Sicarii, the daggermen, right? Who were basically assassinating Roman magistrates on site or trying to whenever they did, right? So again, there wasn't one Jewish response or Jewish answer. There were many. There were multiple, right? But tensions are going higher and higher and higher, both between some groups in Rome and between groups themselves. Eventually, this tension is going to lead to rioting centered in Jerusalem, and then outright revolt, or more large-scale revolt, against Roman authorities, right? 66 CE, the governor of Syria, where kind of the closest full Roman legion was stationed, right? He brings his troops, marches into Judea and besieges the city of Jerusalem. But he, and don't quite get an explanation of what happens, right? But ends up suffering a crushing defeat, which is going to kind of spark even more kind of action against Rome. The Roman general Vespasian will be assigned command. He will be given command over a couple of new armies and takes over marching his forces into Judea. While he is on command there, when we hit the death of the Emperor Nero, right, and the year of the 4 emperors, he's going to be proclaimed emperor by his armies, and from there go on to be emperor of Rome. All right, so we get primary source 37. Josephus. On the life of Josephus. Okay, so Josephus, again, a really interesting character, right? So he was a member of this kind of, again, elite local aristocracy, right? He served as a government official, then as a general, right? Fighting at first, right, against Rome. He's going to be captured and then essentially turn and become an advisor and advocate for the Emperor Vespasian himself.
He also wrote about Jesus, right?
Was it? He did. He did. He's one of the. He writes a lot of information about just kind of the what's going on in Judea and kind of what's going on in Judaism at this time period. So he's one of our most important sources. One of the last things he writes is basically a biography of his life, and so this excerpt is kind of part from kind of the beginning of his autobiography, right? Talking about his, kind of probably unforeseen series of experiences. Okay, so why is this excerpt interesting? Like, what can we learn from this? What can it tell us? What can we learn from this?
I feel like he knew, because of the revolts, that the Romans would somehow put it down. So he didn't want a bloodshed.
Okay.
On the Jewish side, so he kind of wanted to protect them. So
or at least that's what he says now, right? So we don't quite know what he says at the beginning, but here, right, because this is written many years after the fact, right? He describes himself as being kind of an opponent of outright revolt against the Romans because he believes the Romans are too strong. Right.
If I just have he's also tell from knowing the passages and as well as reading the background, and he also tried to justify his actions, especially when he has especially when he has surrendered to his rival, Flavius Vespasian, who later becomes emperor of Rome. That in the aftermath of the first Jewish-Roman War, he begins to see trying to sell the idea that the Romans were that everything that happened during that war, the Romans themselves were trying to get out the punishment against the Jewish people.
So that's how he kind of casts.
Vespasian.
That's how he explains his support from Vespasian. Is that he later argues, so he doesn't do it in this excerpt himself, but he argues that Vespasian was basically sent by the Jewish God as a punishment for the Jewish people for turning away from their God. So in fact, that kind of Vespasian, while not being Jewish himself, is kind of an instrument of the Jewish God, and thus that's why he's kind of supporting Vespasian.
Crazy how Jesus would have something to say about that.
Well, that's good. All right, what else can we learn from this? This is a really, really rich source that tells us a lot about kind of provincial life and relationships with Rome. Tell me something interesting or important. Anything. Nicolette, what do you have?
That they found prospect of the revolt of Rome. The idea of revolting Rome.
What about it?
But he says that they, here at number 5,
Mhm.
it says that there I found revolutionary movements already on foot, widespread joy at the prospect of revolt from Rome.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that they were anticipating this battle, and that they wanted to prove that they were just as worthy as these Romans to fight the Romans in battle.
Great, all right. So that there were, and again, notice he talks about there were some groups, some movements of people, some factions that were very eager to go to war with Rome, right? Like they were looking for an opportunity to fight Rome. But one thing that's useful about that, right, is he tells us that that's, again, not a universal belief, right? That's the belief of some people there, right? Some groups wanted this, others not so much. Ryan, what do you have?
Also in that same passage in number 4, he also made clear on the fact that and trying to urge them that in comparison to Rome's capabilities, especially in terms of military, that it was directly inferior to that, and that they would be utterly destroyed if they tried to revolt.
And whose argument is that? So he says some groups were very excited at the prospect of going to fight Rome
Alright,
and believe they can take it on. And then who's like, no, Rome's too strong, we're going to get crushed?
Josephus.
Josephus, right? So that's his argument.
yeah.
Or at least that's what he claims his argument was. People are unsure about how trustworthy perhaps some of his later explanations are. There's no way to answer that, but some people wonder if he was perhaps a little bit more eager for a fight than he lets on after the fact. But we don't know. All right. What else? Can we learn anything else? Is there anything else that strikes you as interesting or important or useful? Gabriela.
Maybe in paragraph 6, where it talks about how Jews were going against their own nation as well, or they were kind of like forced in a way,
Okay.
because I think the natives of Scythopolis,
Mm-hmm.
they were making the Jews there fight against any other rebel Jews or anything like that.
Okay, right?
So I found that interesting because, like, in a way, they're having like they're imagining that, you know, the war is against, you know, Jews and Romans.
Mm-hmm.
So like making Jews fight against each other might cause like a gap between them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But then also, so yes. And then how does that, what's kind of the ultimate revolution of this when he's talking about Scythopolis? And he says that there were kind of outside Jewish invaders, right? And that the locals got the kind of, they kind of pressed the local Jewish communities to fight against them. And then what? They said, and with their assistance of kind of local Jewish people, they defeated the invaders. Nicolette, do you have it?
No, I was gonna mention something else. You can continue.
Okay, so he said they defeated them. And then the people of Scythopolis, after the victory, with no thought of the allegiance due to fellow citizens and Confederates, i.e. the local kind of Jewish communities who had fought with them, they put them all, to the number of many thousands, to the sword. The Jewish residents in Damascus met with a similar fate. And I've given these a more detailed account in my other volume, right? So he says, basically, they pressed the local Jewish communities to fight off the invaders. After they fought off the Jewish invaders, what did they do to the local communities?
I just strike them down.
They killed them, right? Yeah. So again, the people who had been their fellow citizens and just fought on their side, right? And so he goes on. He says, I allude to this, right, to convince my readers that the war with the Romans was due not so much to the deliberate choice of the Jews as to the necessity. So what's Josephus suggesting here that perhaps the Edict of Augustus might also support? When he says the reason to go to war with the Romans was was due not so much to deliberate choice, but to necessity. What's he suggesting?
That it was basically necessary for Jewish people for their religious rights
Yeah, right? Because why?
because they were being oppressed.
Yeah, essentially, right? That again, that there was, again, action being taken against the Jewish people, unwarranted action, right? In the case here of Scythopolis, that somehow it was keeping them from living in that case, or living in a way to practice their religion that they had no other choice, right? So again, it speaks to, okay, well, we got the idea of kind of general tolerance. I mean, and even Augustus, the emperor, supports this, but nonetheless, on the ground, right, that there's going to be conflict, right, between different groups, and perhaps tension versus different practices, or, regarding something, right? Okay. So the last thing I'll mention here, I guess, then I'll move on, right? Number 9. So he's talking about the city of Tiberias, which was an important city in Galilee, just to the north of Judea, right? And he says there were 3 factions in the city. The first consisted of respectable citizens, headed by Julius Capellus. He and his associates, Herod the son of Miaris, Herod the son of Gamalius, and Compsus the son of Compsus, I do not include the brother Crispus, were at that time unanimous in recommending the city to continue its allegiance to the Romans and the king. Right? So one group, we want to stay loyal to Rome. These views were not shared by Pistis, who, besides the malign influence of his son Justus, had a strain of madness in his nature. The second faction, composed of the most insignificant persons, was bent on war. So not really made up of important people, but they were all set on war. Then Justus, the son of Pistis, was the ringleader of the third party, who was feigning hesitation about hostilities, not wanting to go to war, but he was eager for revolution, kind of like the second group. But why was Justus eager for revolution? He was reckoning that a change in government would bring him into power. So again, what does this tell us here about kind of the communities? In this case, in Tiberias, in Galilee. What are we doing? Brian.
Well, before we know from this passage is that, as I already mentioned, that there are 3 factions that are in Tiberias that are severely divided.
Mm-hmm.
With one of them being loyal to Rome,
Mm-hmm.
and the others, whose leaders were deemed as mad and wanted to bring power for themselves.
Mm. Well, that was the third group.
Well,
Yeah, so the second group is against Rome. It seems to maybe be, he doesn't really say, but kind of implied just because of the whole, what he had mentioned earlier, out of necessity, needing to, kind of resist in order to protect your identity. And you get the third group who wants revolution, not, he at least implies, not really because of any great reason, but because they just want to kind of come to power themselves, right? So again, different opinions, different goals, diversity of actions, right? Which again is unsurprising, right? If you talk about any city, not everyone in the city is going to feel the same way, it's going to think the same way, it's going to want to do the same thing, right? So we're kind of getting a glimpse of it here. You've got some people who are just like, no, we're going to stay loyal to Rome. No, we've got to revolt. Let's not do anything, but I want to revolt because I want to be in charge, right? So again, just kind of illustrating the factionalism and the kind of difference of thoughts. You think?
Kind of sounds like the Pharisees and Sadducees.
So that's, again, he talks about other groups in Jerusalem that are, again, going to have kind of different objectives and different ways of wanting to interact with Rome. All right, so Jewish revolt is going to be crushed, 70 CE, right? So Vespasian has gone off to be emperor, starting the Flavian dynasty. His son Titus, who will eventually succeed him as emperor, but at this point, right, is left behind in command of the armies. He is going to capture Jerusalem and destroy the temple, right, the second temple. Up here, we have the Arch of Titus that's going to be built much later, kind of celebrating just like him and all of his accomplishments. Part of the Arch of Titus is celebrating the sack of Jerusalem. So you can see here, right, people kind of carrying off treasures that they have captured or that they've seized from the temple, right, including the giant menorah. Again, the kind of subjugation of Judea, or resubjugation of Judea, was kind of a big talking point for Vespasian and his sons. So they tended to include it on a lot of their coinage, right? So here's a coin issued by Vespasian, right? We've got the Emperor Vespasian on the left. So this is when he's emperor, right? On the back, we get kind of like a palm tree type thing, and Judea captive, right? Judea subdued or captured.
Did they ever recover the menorah? Find it?
Don't know. I don't know if anyone knows. I don't know. I don't know if anyone knows. All right. So even after that, there's going to be some sporadic resistance until the last of those holding out are going to be crushed by the Roman army in 73. Okay. So things kind of continue. Still kind of an underlying tension. Still the factionalism exists. A second revolt is going to kick off in the 2nd century. The spark for this seems to be the Emperor Hadrian. So Jerusalem had been largely destroyed by Titus when he sacked the city. Hadrian is going to rebuild the site as a new capital city, which he names Aelia Capitolina. So Aelius was his family name. He was Aelius Hadrianus. So it's going to build a new capital city, essentially kind of on the bones of Jerusalem. Regional capital city, not like replacing Rome. Regional capital city, he was going to build it. Again, this sparks off a massive uprising because, again, it's obviously a holy site. So rebels led by Bar Kokhba will end up capturing the city itself and, in fact, are able to establish an independent state for about a year, maintain their independence, actually issuing their own coinage, which is really interesting, is that they took Roman coins and then essentially stamped them. With a new image. So on one side, we've got the Temple of Jerusalem, right, which had been destroyed earlier by Titus. And then on the back side, written in Hebrew, basically what was it? Let's see, something like Judea Victorious or something like that. On the right side. I don't remember the exact translation, but it was something like that, right? But again, issuing their own coinage, right? Adopting or using Hebrew lettering, right? Marking their distinction from the Greco-Roman kind of imperials, right? That being said, it's not going to last very long. Massive counterattack by Roman forces is going to lead to the destruction of the rebels, and the Romans are going to regain control. So after the second revolt, Roman authorities are going to take drastic steps to suppress Judaism. But I just realized I'm out of time. All right, so it's 5:45. I'll pick